Hey, Brad and Jonathan. I wanted to ask a little bit about calculating your fine number if you also have a mortgage that you expect to, drop off after at some point when you're within that retirement time frame. Do you continue to add that mortgage payment onto your expenses, or if you know it's going to drop off, let's say 5 years after you retire, how do you account for that in your numbers? Thanks a lot.
Yeah, this is a really good question.
Yeah, there's an interesting nuance in there at the very end, right?
Yeah. All right. So there's kind of twofold here. My plan was to plan on having it paid off by the time that I am in drawdown. I plan on actually paying it off before going to drawdown. So I've said that out loud before. So for me, it kind of simplifies it. But having said that, and this is a great point, I got to be honest, I do calculate my fine number around what does my life cost with a mortgage. So that's like that,
Mm.
those two don't totally compute. Like I calculate my fine number around what my life cost actually now, but I do plan on having the mortgage paid off. And to some degree, that's like it's my like fudge factor. And it's a significant fudge factor, but it's kind of like my fat fi without knowing it. Let fat fi sneak up on me approach to this. It's not like mathematically perfect, but it's like it works for me. And I'll have to think through, is there a better answer than that? Because you have an actual question there that I haven't answered. But that's just kind of for myself. That's where my mind is personally.
Yeah, let me take a stab at this and first take a step back. So for anybody who's listening, who's wondering what we're talking about here with calculating the phi number, et cetera, basically how we conceptualize this is you look at your annual expenses and you multiply by 25 to get your phi number. This is a play on the 4% rule of thumb. And we won't go into the exact precise math right now, but just suffice to say, if your life costs $40,000, you multiply that by 25, you get $1 million, and that's your phi number. That's when you theoretically are at that point of financial independence. So that works for any amount, right? If your life costs 80,000, you need $2 million. This any type. It's just a real simple mathematical equation. So that's what the question is around. And the ultimately we're saying, okay, I've got a mortgage right now. So let's take the simple use case. I've got a mortgage right now. I'm going to pay it off the day before I reach phi. And how does that factor into my phi number calculation? And I would say very clearly, I would take that amount out of my annual expenses. So now there is a caveat, right? So when you look at your mortgage payment, there are multiple components of that mortgage payment, right? The biggest portion for most of us that's the principal and interest. That's the amount as we conceptualize as the mortgage payment. But really, there's also, for the vast majority of us, there's taxes included in there, and there is insurance, home insurance. So that's the escrow amount you pay every month. And basically that amount, regardless of whether your mortgage, the principal and interest, whether that's paid off or not, the taxes and home insurance, that will continue to exist. Now, obviously, I guess you have a choice then to continue paying the insurance or not. Now, that's beyond the scope of this conversation of whether that makes sense or not. For me, I will continue with my home insurance. But so you cannot take that component. So the taxes and home insurance, you wouldn't take that out of your annual expenses. You would look and say, okay, what component of this larger mortgage payment is principal and interest? And that's really, really easy to find out on your mortgage statement. So that should not be that hard. I would just look at that, which is a monthly amount. I would multiply it by 12. And I would say, okay, this is the portion that is going to go away the day I pay off this mortgage. So I certainly would not include that in the amount of assets I needed to get to phi, right? Because again, going under the conception that I'm going to pay this off before I get to phi, then clearly it would not be included in. Now, Jonathan, we get to a much more difficult question. If, hey, I'm planning on paying this off 5 years into phi, right? So I think, then this is going to be way beyond the scope of my ability to do mental math on a live event. I think we need to look into this further as to how it would factor in, because obviously you need to account for having it for a period, but not for the rest of eternity, right? So there clearly it has to be factored in to some degree, but you also then have to plan for basically like a multi-phase. It reminds me of Tanya Hester, who came on our podcast years ago and talked about a multi-phase FI figure. And, maybe she has some resources, but this might be, do you have any thoughts?
I was also thinking of Justin from Root of Good gave a presentation at a Camp FI. Looking forward to Camp FI's coming back this year. But he gave a presentation at Camp FI talking about, I think the name of it was the Retirement Smile. Spot check me on that. But the idea here is that there's so many people telling you that like there's going to be all these unexpected costs and life's going to be so expensive and you can't, kind of the Susie Orman type. You can't account for, all these unexpected costs in retirement. And Justin was making the case, well, actually, you might be surprised at how your life actually gets less expensive post-retirement. Have you accounted for the fact that when you don't have two people commuting to work, you probably don't need two cars? And the fact that then you don't need to carry insurance on two cars. And the fact that, maybe the kids are grown up and out of the house. And there's that food cost that comes down and the mortgage ends up being paid off and that ends up coming down and a myriad of others. And then he broke down his budget. And so the point is a lot of people are a little bit, I don't know if the word's skeptical or not, but there's some pushback on the 4% rule. And based around, the market is unknown and whatever happens during the first 5 years of your retirements can really impact dramatically the success rate. But, I think one of the point Justin was making is there's also some room for optimism that you probably overcalculated what you needed. Not telling you to change your calculation, but just that, a lot of us have a tendency just to stay in a very Eeyore place. And if you can just kind of, if you make plans, just, don't always come with the doomsday. It's not always doomsday. And in fact, maybe there's some unexpected blessings that will pop up. So yeah, check out his presentation as well there because he shares some real numbers on his site about, he really does. You were talking about a retired family, he retired in his early 30s. They got 4 kids, 4 kids, I think. And they're now multiple years in, net worth probably in between 2 to 3 million, somewhere in that range. They share their net worth reports and their net worth keeps going up, even though they're retired. I mean, that's kind of a big part of what they say. Like you might be pleasantly surprised. So,
yeah, I think that's all good advice, certainly. And yeah, I'll continue to think about this exact scenario. But yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, that mortgage will drop off and you have to consider that. So your FI number is going to be dramatically lower than it would be currently. But you obviously don't want to just plan on it being for the post mortgage because you do have to cover those first 5 years in this scenario. So yeah, I think, basically if you can calculate your FI number based on the post mortgage and then have a plan to cover that additional mortgage amount for the first 5 years, I think that'll kind of split the difference here. So